The Jacksonville Daily Record's Karen Bruni-Mathis uncovers Jacksonville's latest commercial development and business news. Stay informed with the Jacksonville Daily Record, available online at jacksdailyrecord.com and in print every Thursday. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, how do the president's attacks on judges, law firms, and accepted norms impact ordinary Americans? We talked to two legal experts about how far the system can bend without breaking. Then, what new research shows about the difficulty in treating back pain. And an all-new lineup of dancers gets ready for their star turn to benefit the Jacksonville Children's Chorus. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or tag us on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. Social media giant Meta Platforms is expected to face off in court today against the Federal Trade Commission. At issue whether Meta's killer acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp should be unraveled. Rachel Myrow of member station KQED has more.
The FTC launched this antitrust investigation during President Trump's first term. Since the start of Trump's second term, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has visited the White House 3 times. Even so, Lee Hepner, senior legal counsel for the nonprofit American Economic Liberties Project, says he expects this trial to start on schedule.
Nothing's outside the realm of possibility. I mean, we've been suffering from whiplash with this administration, and predictability is not on the table in our political system today.
In a statement, a Meta spokesperson wrote that Meta faces plenty of competition from other platforms like TikTok and YouTube. For NPR News, I'm Rachel Myrow.
El Salvador's President Bukele is slated to meet with President Trump at the White House today. This as the Trump administration provided its first update on the status of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador by the administration. Late last week, the Supreme Court ordered the administration to begin the process of returning him to the U.S., though it left the main decision-making of the case with a federal judge. Attorney Benjamin Osorio, part of Abrego's legal team, spoke to ABC News.
I anticipate that the press is going to ask President Bukele questions about Mr. Abrego and whether or not he's willing to return him. So I'm interested to see his responses there. I mean, since he was coming up from El Salvador, he could have put him on the plane with him. But obviously, that's not going to happen.
A federal judge has ordered daily updates on Abrego's status from the government. British authorities are racing to keep the country's last steel plant functioning. With the Trump administration's tariffs on steel and the subsequent threat of global trade wars, Britain is trying to salvage its domestic production. NPR's Lauren Frayer has details.
2 blast furnaces at a plant in Scunthorpe, northern England, are the only things keeping British domestic steel production alive, and they actually belong to a Chinese company. British lawmakers were recalled to Parliament from their Easter break this weekend and passed an emergency law giving the government temporary control of Britain's last steel plant, amid suspicions its Chinese owners might shut it down, sell it for scrap, and force this country to rely on Chinese steel imports. The death of domestic production suddenly looks more risky amid tariffs and trade wars. If the blast furnaces in Scunthorpe fall below a certain temperature, they cannot be revived. So British officials are rushing coal fuel to them as they weigh whether to nationalize them altogether. Lauren Frayer, NPR News, London.
Wall Street Dow futures are up over 400 points. This is NPR News in Washington.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning, I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. The Jacksonville Transportation Authority is temporarily rerouting a few bus routes in San Marco due to construction on a new drainage system. JTA says routes 8A/8B and Route 25 will be rerouted due to the road closures along San Marco Boulevard and LaSalle Street. Work at that intersection includes a new pump station to get rid of stormwater into the St. Johns River and install new, larger pipes to lessen flooding. Details on JTA's reroutes can be found at jta.com. Federal lawmakers want to repeal a provision within the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, that is designed to serve working families. As Gabriella Paul reports, it allows higher-earning families in high-cost areas to get food assistance.
The provision takes into account how much a family spends on housing, energy, and medical costs in addition to their household income. If federal lawmakers eliminate the 1996 law, it would specifically hurt families who are above the income threshold but still struggle to put food on the table. Carolyn Vega is with the hunger relief organization Share Our Strength. She says it's ironic the proposed changes are in the name of government efficiency.
There are a lot of proposals on the table right now that would dramatically increase red tape and make it a lot harder for families to access the benefits they need to put food on the table and dramatically increase the burden for schools and states.
Vega says the changes would cause more families to cycle on and off of SNAP more frequently. I'm Gabriella Paul.
Warm and dry today in Jacksonville.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the estate of Joan B. Kroc, whose bequest serves as an enduring investment in the future of public radio and seeks to help NPR be the model for high-quality journalism in the 21st century. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, the president and the rule of law. We talked to two legal experts about clashes between the Trump administration and the courts, the Constitution, and established legal precedent. Later in the program, what new research reveals about the prevalence and persistence of back pain. But first, from college campuses to deportation courts, the legal system is grappling with a presidency divorced from norms of conduct and deference. Here to talk about it is Nick Allard, founding dean of the Jacksonville University College of Law and a veteran of the Washington, D.C. political world. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Bryan Gowdy, a board-certified appellate attorney who has argued orally before and briefed the U.S. Supreme Court on several cases. Good morning, Bryan.
Good morning, Ann. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Nick, there are now upwards of 180 lawsuits that have been brought against the Trump administration in the nearly 12 weeks of his second term. And there's obviously a lot of different targets on these cases. But do you see an overarching theme of any kind?
Well, I do, sadly. And first of all, I'm just so grateful to be able to be here and to speak up with my own views that are independent of any organization or other group, and just be able to express because of the country we live in, and have the freedom to state my beliefs, give my analysis, and even be wrong. So that's very good. But there's a theme, and it seems to be, and I'm sad to say this, but it's a theme about dismantling constitutional guardrails that have long protected us and served us well. And so we're focusing today, talk about lower back pain. I've got a very lower back pain from what's been going on. But we're just focusing on the aspect of attacking the rule of law and people who represent folks in our adversarial system, which is built to be adversarial by legal experts who act on behalf of clients vigorously and within the rules, the legal rules, and also intimidating and attacking judges who are need to be independent. And so if you remove those guardrails, some of the most important protections of the American people are removed. And so that's what's at stake right now.
And Bryan Gowdy, to Nick's point, there's a lot of issues, and we'll get to some of them in terms of the legal challenges and the arguments that are being made. But the treatment of judges is a singular issue that does seem to be somewhat unique to this administration in terms of calling for the impeachment of judges who've ruled against the president, suggesting that on his own social media that the courts are basically powerless to tell him what to do, saying, he who saves his country does not violate any law. So can you kind of contextualize what those comments, how they maybe differ from what we've seen in the past and what their significance is, if any?
Yeah, their significance is that we have three branches of government, and there's one branch that doesn't have any army and doesn't control the purse strings, and it depends wholly on respect that their orders will be followed. I think I had shared to you, Ann, that I recently heard Judge Shoflat, who's been a federal judge for more than 50 years
Here.
here in Jacksonville, who
Great man.
presided over the school desegregation cases. He spoke about that time period where when I was very, very, very little, and don't remember it myself, but that he knew that despite the very contentious nature of the litigation, that his orders would be followed. And I think that personal attacks on the judges, like we've seen from the administration directed at Chief Judge Boasberg, the chief judge for the District of Columbia, are completely unwarranted and need to stop. I saw a lot of statements by the administration that somehow, he was this liberal,
Radical
over-the-board
left-wing
right judge.
lunatic.
The basis on which the Supreme Court reversed him was very narrow.
And we should say this is the deportation case that is
Right.
at issue. This is the judge.
This deals with the case where the administration was deporting alleged members of a Venezuelan gang to El Salvador, and it happened very, very quickly over a weekend, and there was a temporary restraining order entered by Chief Judge Boasberg. What the Supreme Court unanimously has agreed that each of these individuals is entitled to due process. It was not a significant victory for the administration, despite their public statements since then.
At the Supreme Court level.
Right. What the victory was where should those challenges take place? And, I read there was 9 justices, and then there were 3 judges at the D.C. Court of Appeals, including one, relatively conservative judge. They all agreed that the administration has to give these immigrants due process. The question simply was where. And I think, for the administration to attack Chief Judge Boasberg, all 14 judges
Agree
that these individuals are entitled to due process before they're deported.
And his order was essentially disregarded, right? In terms of, these people shouldn't be sent back. And then when they were in the air saying they need to be brought back. And
Yeah, the administration took the position that because the order was only oral, it didn't have to be followed. And I don't think anybody who's practiced law or been involved in the court system would agree with that. I've never heard of anybody saying that I can disregard the judge's order unless and until it's put down in writing.
I mean, walk us through what might happen. I mean, if you said to a judge, "Hey, judge, you didn't put that in writing. I don't need to follow that directive."
I mean, the system would break down. Lawyers, I don't think the lawyers would be, probably not able to practice law if that was the position we took. I mean, the reality is that when you're in these type of cases, things are moving very fast. You can't get everything down in writing quickly. But if the judge says it orally, you have a transcript, it's on the record. It's part of the system. So, I agree with Nick that the attacks on the judges have to stop. As far as how we got here, I would say I think the attacks on the judges are. I mean, it's fine to criticize a judge's decision or reasoning, and I think that's novel. But I think the bigger picture of why we got here, really, you could look at both, Democratic and Republican administrations in the past. There's just been, I think, over the last, 85 years, this slow creep of the executive branch taking more and more power away from Congress, and Congress, frankly, not asserting its own power. And, some of these cases, we can talk about it in detail, but there's just these statutes that are very broadly worded, and it gives an opening for either administration to any administration to come come forward and walk right up to the line or go past the line and try to assert that things can be done with executive power that really should be going through Congress.
And Nick, you were sort of alluding or mentioning how the administration and its allies have characterized the judge in this particular case, calling him a lunatic. But we know that, his AG Pam Bondi and his border czar Tom Homan have also said this judge has no authority. We don't care what he says. I mean, essentially saying he has no business telling us what to do in this case. And it does seem that disregard could lead to just open defiance.
Chaos and a constitutional crisis. So I agree. And also I agree with everything that Bryan was saying. And the vice president who supposedly has a law degree from a very fine institution in New Haven, has said point blank that, which is wrong, that the president doesn't have to obey court orders. At least that's the way I heard it.
Yeah, he said, quote, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power.
And that is wrong. And the importance of this is that one of the responsibilities of of lawyers in America and legal educators is to help not only educate their students and each other, but the public about how our government is supposed to work. So when somebody in the public hears that the vice president of the United States, who has a law degree, says that, it's up to everybody else to help correct that and to demonstrate that that's simply not correct. But I can understand how people might be misled by that. It's unfortunate, and he ought to know better. But we would have chaos if judicial orders, there's a process, as Chief Justice Roberts has said when he weighed in about the intimidation of judges, and I think the criticism, it was of Judge Boasberg. He said, you have a process. If you don't disagree with a judge, you can complain about it, but there's a legal process and to follow, and that's the way that we should proceed, is through the legal process and procedures. Our Constitution, the rule of law, can be boiled down to this. It gives us the right to live in peace and harmony and prosper and be different and to disagree. We have this wonderful right to be different and to disagree peacefully while we progress and try to be a better, more perfect union.
So what is a constitutional crisis? We hear a lot about, we could have a constitutional crisis if judges' authority is disregarded. And it has been in these cases, in some of them so far. There has been this expression of open defiance. At what point does it become a constitutional crisis? Does it have to be defying the Supreme Court as opposed to federal, district court judges?
Well, we're not there yet. And I have to believe that our beautiful, cantilevered, constitutional, self-correcting system of limited government will prevail. But we can see the end. We can see the chaos from here. And the crisis will come if, for example, there is judicial process that concludes that the government is wrong, and then it just overlooks it. It is not up to just the courts to be the only institution that backstops our Constitution. Now, right now, the United States Congress, and forgive me for saying this, but I don't think I'd get much disagreement on this, is supine and prone at the same time, which is quite a maneuver, a gymnastic maneuver. So that is why so many lawyers and educators and retired judges and civic groups are speaking up now. And so I predict that will grow, not diminish, and the public will join them.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about some of the conflicts between the current administration and the Constitution. We're talking with two legal experts, and we will take your calls and questions. If you have them, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or X at FCC On Air. We do have an email from Tammy, and she's asking, kind of specific to the issue of deportations. Could you talk about the difference between deportation and rendition? And as a second question, would rendition to a foreign prison be a violation of the Eighth Amendment under the prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment? I've heard both of those terms used here and there to describe what's happening by these roundups and deportations. Can you kind of provide some clarity of what the distinction is there?
I'm not an expert on that distinction, so I don't want to weigh in on what that term rendition is being used. I would just say, generally speaking, um, those who are not citizens are subject to the immigration laws, and there are, as we were discussing, there are some statutes that give the president and the executive branch pretty broad authority for deporting people. And so I think what's happening really here is that these statutes, you know, some of whom are very old, one from 1798, have never been used this way before.
And that's the Alien Enemies Act you're referencing.
Right. So, and I think what's happening is that the executive branch right now is really pushing the outer boundaries, if not going beyond the outer boundaries of what these statutes say. And of course, they're entitled to make their arguments in court. What they're not entitled to do is disregard the courts, because that would lead to the constitutional
I might
crisis.
be able to cast a little light on Tammy's question. And by the way, Tammy, if you don't have a law degree, we'd love to have you at the Jacksonville University College of Law, because
Always recruiting.
those are two great questions, the difference between rendition and deportation. And then this concept, which I don't see any of the brainiest lawyers in the United States have yet raised, but you point out, is that the Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And if we are sending people who have U.S. rights to a foreign prison that arguably is cruel and unusual because it doesn't meet our standards, that's another argument. So well done, Tammy, for raising that question. So rendition is typically associated with covert, dangerous. It's removal from the United States covertly of people who pose, based on, even in that instance, some judicial review, but to send them to a less protective jurisdiction outside of the United States for interrogation and so on. So that's commonly the case. So if you expand that broadly, our rights not to be snatched off the streets and then sent somewhere else, if you're using rendition, it's supposed to be a very narrow process. It's not one where you see, well, we want to get out of this country 1 million people. That's not what it's for. And no one wants dangerous terrorists in this country. Nobody wants criminals who are illegally here in this country. This is about something else, much broader, and the courts and laws are there to protect Americans. And we protect the least advantaged, and sometimes we protect the rights of people who are bad, so that they are justly accused and processed, and that protects us. Because if we don't protect the littlest, the weakest, and the worst of us, we're not protecting ourselves.
We have a call from Les on the west side. Good morning, Les. Go ahead.
Good morning. Great show. I would like to ask if your group, your panel there, believe that the president is operating on his own knowledge of the law, or do you feel that he's being counseled by others? Thank you.
Thanks, Les. Your thoughts?
No, he clearly has counsel. I mean, he has the White House counsel. He has a lot of lawyers at the Justice Department. I think, one thing clients can do, including the president, is you keep changing lawyers till you find the one that gives you the answer you want. I think there has been some of the lawyers within the Justice Department, have tried to correct things. We were just discussing a moment ago the situation with Chief Judge Boasberg. Originally, the administration seemed to be taking the viewpoint that they could do what is called rendition, which is just remove somebody from the process, as Nick was describing, from the country without due process. By the time that case got to the Supreme Court, though, the government had conceded that it needed to give due process. So it seemed like at some point some lawyers weighed in with that. But we can't know. We don't know what legal advice the president is getting. That's privilege, but he's getting legal advice. I don't think he's doing these things on his own, but he's obviously getting probably the legal advice he wants.
Well, we do know that, in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who's the Maryland father that was deported to El Salvador, that the judge in that case, the same judge, had asked the president or his lawyers, why the federal government couldn't bring him back from this prison. And the attorney said to the judge, I don't know. My client hasn't given me a reasonable answer, and then was subsequently removed from the case. And so there are attorneys representing the president that may not necessarily be on the same page always with him, Nick.
Yeah, and before Nick, I just want to weigh in on that real quickly. I think we talked about the constitutional crisis. One, I think, very encouraging sign, or I should say a encouraging sign, is President Trump on Friday was asked about the unanimous Supreme Court decision affirming the Maryland judge's order requiring the administration to facilitate the return of that individual from El Salvador. And he said he would respect the decision. I think the administration needs to do that for every judge, not just when it's 9 justices. But Nick, you want to weigh in?
Well, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. Who knows what goes on in the president's mind, but he was reputed and notorious, or I guess I use a less pejorative term, he was well known to disregard advice of his counsel and do go through the process that Bryan was just describing about finding counsel. And now, this is concerning, is that there are directives out, including issued by the Attorney General of the United States, which is quite extraordinary, unprecedented, that nobody at the Justice Department or other people are supposed to disagree or criticize or have an independent opinion. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's an intimidation internally of attorneys who are both inside the government operating. And an example was that the attorney who appeared before the court, Chief Judge Boasberg, and explained the truth that he didn't have an answer and that he couldn't explain what had happened, he was fired. Mm-hmm. So there are consequences, and it's not dissent and disagreement and vigorous debate are not comfortable, they're time-consuming, and sometimes they're unwanted, but they're healthy and they're useful to get to the right answer.
We've got an email from Ross, and he says, Trump is not the first to act this way towards the judiciary. He's just following the precedent set by those before him. FDR intimidated the Supreme Court into backing down by threatening to pack the court, he writes. Obama spoke fondly of his pen and phone. Americans seem to like the imperial presidency, and Trump recognizes that, which is why he acts like a king. That was something you were sort of getting at a minute ago, Bryan.
Yeah, I think that's I wouldn't say Trump's identical to these presidents that were just mentioned or any other. I think he is unique in a lot of ways, but he's not unique that, really since the time of FDR, the president and the executive branch has gotten more and more powerful, and we as Americans have allowed that, and the Congress has allowed that. I mean, just as an example, from the last 2 Democratic administrations, there's a big problem, obviously, with the Dreamers under immigration. But rather than get a congressional solution, because that seemed to be too difficult, we had an executive order. And then, in the last administration, there's a problem with student loan debt, a big problem. But rather than get a congressional solution to that, we had an executive order. Mm-hmm. And this may seem way off topic, but it's, for those of you that are sports fans, there's lots of problems right now with amateur athletics in the NCAA. But rather than get a solution from Congress on that, we don't have an executive order. We have a lawsuit solving it. So I think really a lot of this boils down to Congress in the last 80, 90 years hasn't done what it was designed to do, which is make the law.
Sadly, it's dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. It really is. But I'll tell you one thing in terms of, first of all, FDR's court packing scheme was one of the greatest failures of his 4 terms and did not succeed, and he paid a sharp political price for it. But the other thing is, Mrs. Allard, my mother, always hammered into our heads that 2 wrongs don't make a right, right? So just because it's been done before doesn't make it right. And we're now in a place where we continue to work together, hopefully collaboratively, towards a more perfect union. We can decide with our own eyes what's the way to go. And I think that the rule of law and the Constitution provides the guardrails that have kept us together as a very in very difficult, changing times.
I want to ask a little bit about, we've been talking about the president's actions and attitudes towards the court judges, but there have also been these series of actions recently taken about against lawyers and law firms, which has been commanding some headlines recently because it is so unusual. These are law firms that have in many cases fought the administration on one case or another, have earned the president's ire, and so are now being targeted and sort of forced into these agreements with the president in order to make these executive orders go away.
And some preemptively sought the agreements. So there's 9 of the largest, most prestigious, wealthiest law firms that have reportedly, because we haven't really seen the details, worked out an agreement to avoid the harsh retaliatory penalties that would have been imposed otherwise, or investigations. But 3 have drawn a line and are litigating. And their litigation, Perkins Coie, a very old, prestigious, highly respected firm, was singled out and was the first firm to get an harsh executive retaliatory order. And
what are these orders based on? I mean, is the president alleging something illegal? Is he alleging that they have violated their oath or the law in some way? What is the legal justification for saying that he's going to take their security clearances, he's going to penalize them if they don't sort of change their ways or satisfy him?
Well, I should say that from my reading, this is my personal opinion, but a lot of people share this view, there is no constitutional or statutory basis whatsoever, and there's no evidence presented. And in fact, one of the fatal defects of the executive orders, again, in my opinion, is there's just assertions, and the explicit rationale is for disfavor, political views expressed, representing clients that you don't like, in some cases accused of being racially biased. These firms are probably the furthest thing from that you can imagine, but it's basically because of asserted DEI policies, which is a hot button. So the 3 cases that were brought in record time, in 2 cases on the same day, a temporary restraining order nullifying the effective date of these orders was obtained by the courts. So, yeah, it's really kind of a remarkable, unprecedented action. Now, am I surprised by these big firms taking this action?
Caving, you mean?
Caving.
Well, explain to us. I mean, what are they thinking of? Why would they, as opposed to fighting, as some firms have decided to do? Why are they deciding to? And we should say they're offering huge sums of money, hundreds of millions of dollars.
$1 billion total now, almost 940, as far as we know, $1 million.
And that's money that's going to basically go to support President Trump's favored causes or legal battles.
Well, it's a cynical misappropriation of the term pro bono, publico pro bono work, because that is the work, and Bryan has been a champion of that work in legal services. Lawyers have an obligation. Florida was one of the leaders in the United States for lawyers meeting their obligations, not just to do well, but to do good. And they have an obligation to report. It's not mandatory in Florida, but Florida has been right out there in the expectation that we devote free legal services or discounted legal services not to wealthy people or organization, and not for business promotion or to protect your business, but to people who are less advantaged or organizations that can't afford it. So that's what it's for. This is not pro bono work to give the government or one political leader free legal services as he directs or she directs for their own purpose. So,
But so why are they doing
well,
it?
it's because these are the big firms. There's 500 plus firms that aren't quite as big that have, and some large firms which have signed an amicus brief that's been drafted. But there could be two alternative stories to why they're agreeing, in my view. One is that the big firms are big businesses. And so, like sometimes maybe the press, sadly, the old separation between the business function and the journalistic function, that line has now, evaporated. So law firms are making decisions based on their big business, and they want to avoid and put the problem, which would completely debilitate them and possibly put it out of business. On the other hand, they may realize, why not sign this order because it's unenforceable? The other folks are going to prevail in court. Every paragraph of the order ends with, to the extent permissible by law, and none of it's permissible by law, in my view. They may have taken that point of view, and it may be so ambiguous. They may be in a position to say, well, you're asking us to do something we cannot do because it's not consistent with our professional obligations and so on. So it could be everything or it could be nothing at all, and either of those two options. Neither of them are attractive because I believe if they stood up, the fundamental question that was implicit in what you asked me, Ann, was why would somebody who has a tough case and needs vigorous defense hire a firm that can't defend itself in a tough case?
Mm.
So it's not really in the long term. And then also, why would the best and the brightest people want to work for a firm like that? So it's going to be a big question on how this all plays out, and it could have a big impact on the future of the legal profession.
Brian, one thing that this does is it also opens up potential sanctions against individual lawyers. I mean, this initial one is saying, that the AG and the president can see if sanctions are warranted and kind of file a motion to see if sanctions are warranted. But the end of that same executive directive basically says that in the future, if the attorney general determines that conduct warrants sanctions or other disciplinary actions, they can basically begin the process to remove a security clearance or terminate federal contracts. So it isn't necessarily an inquiry that would begin. It'd be a decision that could be made almost unilaterally if the actions of an attorney or a law firm displeased them.
Yeah, I think so. A few minutes ago, we had somebody email in and say, like, oh, all the prior presidents have done this. But this is something no prior president has done that I am aware of. And I think these executive orders, like I'm reading the one on my screen right now with the Perkins Coie firm, they're the most dangerous aspect of what the administration is doing because they seem to if you read the orders, they're just vindictive. They're just targeting someone who, Perkins Coie, the orders clearly because they represented Hillary Clinton and that was Donald Trump's political opponent. And so to me, this is the most dangerous aspect of what is going on. And I think it's a new problem, different than all the other ones we've discussed this morning, which are the ones we've discussed are generally the executive branch kind of pushing the limits of its authorities. But going after, private businesses, individual law firms, is I think something that should alarm all Americans. And as far as in the legal profession, as Nick alluded to, we have a duty to represent our clients, even in very unpopular causes. Right? It's not popular to represent somebody on death row. It's not popular to represent someone who has speech that all of us may disagree with and that we all find despicable. But when lawyers do that, they're protecting all of our rights because at some point you will be in that minority. And I think trying to attack lawyers simply because they took positions opposite you is probably the most dangerous thing that the administration is doing right now.
Yeah, the language itself says that they can seek sanctions for attorneys and law firms that engage, quote, in vexatious litigation. I mean, it's hard to
We're
imagine
supposed to
anybody
be
who's being sued.
vexatious.
Right. I mean, that kind of is the nature of
Yeah.
an adversarial system. Probably
Yeah, well, I
vexatious.
mean, and clearly, I mean, I would say, look, lawyers don't file. We're obligated not to file frivolous lawsuits, of course. But that's not the way I read these orders. That's not what they're going against. They're really disagreeing with with good faith litigation or even non-litigation activities by the lawyer. It's viewpoint discrimination.
Brian,
at the end of the day.
another point is that all of the alleged gripes were previously litigated,
right,
and lost, all of them, in the courts. So it's been adjudged by courts, which is if you have a dispute, you have a complaint, that's the proper place to go. And so now they're taking another crack at it. This reminds me of the reason that inspired me as an 11-year-old kid to want to become a lawyer was watching To Kill a Mockingbird at the drive-in movie. I mean, I still can barely remember that moment when the light went on for me when Atticus Finch took the case, the really unpopular case of defending the black man who was wrongly accused of raping a white woman. And he took that case. He lost the case. But when he walked out of the courtroom and his children were sitting up in the gallery with the black pastor, and the black pastor said, "Stand up, Scout." That was his daughter's name. "Your father's passing." The thought of being a lawyer and trying to make a difference in a difficult case, that's what motivated a lot of people to become a lawyer. And so we're getting away from that if we let this slide, and I don't think we can.
Yeah, I just like to reiterate what Nick's talking about. I mean, these days we may look back at some at some court decisions, and we all agree with them. For example, Brown versus Board of Education, which desegregated the schools. But you have to remember at the time, the lawyers who brought those cases were very unpopular.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read about when Thurgood Marshall came to the South and had to litigate, and the dangers he and the other lawyers that were with him faced, but those dangers were coming from individuals. When you read this executive order, I mean, it's the same type attitude that resisted for the desegregation litigation, but it's actually in the president's executive order. I mean, if you think back about that period of history, which I think we should all remember, the only reason we were able to desegregate the schools was because the executive branch, President Eisenhower, supported the federal judiciary.
Mm-hmm.
Can I make one more point about these executive orders?
Just briefly, because we're going to have to wrap.
Okay, the language. If you look at other presidential, they're not presidential, they're petulant. You could look at the orders of Madison, Ulysses S. Grant, Nixon, Reagan, Bush. They're presidential, and these are schoolyard bully kind of language, and they're poorly written.
Well, we've got callers on the line and pages of questions, but we're going to have to leave it there. Nick Allard and Bryan Gowdy, thank you so much for being here today. Really
Thank you.
appreciate
Next
it.
time.
All right.
Thank you very much.
And up next, what new an estimated 1 in 4 Americans, particularly women, and it's the leading cause of disability around the world. Here to talk about the latest research into managing lower back pain is Dr. Andrew Shaw. He's a neurosurgeon at Baptist Health. Welcome, Dr. Shaw.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks for having me this morning.
Thank you for being here. So why is back pain so common, and why is it so difficult to treat?
Yeah, so back pain is so multifactorial. If you think about the causes of back pain, there's multiple moving parts in the spine. There's multiple joints called facets. There's multiple bones. There's ligaments. There's muscles. There's discs. There's nerves. So if you think about the multitude of just structures that could potentially cause pain, there are so many potential options for pain, and the identification of those pain generators is incredibly challenging.
And there's, I guess, a lot of ways to injure all of those moving parts.
Yeah, if you imagine as we age, it's like a wear and tear on your tires. You only get one set of these tires, and when you wear them out, you wear them out. And we accumulate that wear and tear as time goes on in life.
Do you see particular causes? I mean, everybody associates things like yard work, with a back injury. Is there something that is a leading contributor to the kinds of back pains that you're dealing with surgically?
So it's just living life. It turns out we're under gravity. When you live under gravity, we have stresses and weights on our bodies, and depending on how we live and how we act, we can exacerbate or cause progressive, more rapid degeneration of our spines. And as that degeneration accumulates, that's when we get those pains that show up.
There are all kinds of ways that people address back pain. Some of it is through surgical solutions, and that's kind of what you offer. But I know that there has been some recent research into non-surgical remedies for back pain, just recently published in the BMJ journal, Evidence-Based Medicine, that it kind of looked through all of these trials and found that most non-invasive treatments for back pain were not effective. And they were looking at everything from acupuncture to massage to muscle relaxants, acetaminophen, opioids, like kind of the gamut of treatments for non-invasive solutions for back pain. And I was surprised to see how generally ineffective they were finding those.
It's such a great question. That we always look for sources or solutions to the problems. And a lot of the times, these treatments are geared at treating the symptoms that we experience. So our bodies have a great capability of healing. And so when we do things like acupuncture, your goal is to release natural anti-inflammatories, natural opioids that your body makes, and that helps reduce that sensation of discomfort. Medications like ibuprofen is intended to bring down inflammation. So if you have a muscle strain, ibuprofen is very helpful. The hard thing about those studies is they're a compilation of a heterogeneous population, meaning a population of all kinds of pathologies that are not all the same. So the variables that exist are so many that trying to identify one particular treatment for all these things, there's no silver bullet that will solve all the problems. And so if you're looking at, chiropractic care, your goal is really to improve the function of the muscles. Physical therapy, you're trying to make muscles function ideally. Whether it's a muscle that's spasmed, your goal is to get it to relax and release. If you're out of balance, it's to restore balance. If you're weak, it's to restore strength. And so, when they look at the gamut of these treatments, physical therapy is geared at making you more functional. And so if it's more functional, and then you're able to, eliminate some of those sources of pain. If it's inflammation, things like injections are super helpful, because if you think about an acutely herniated disc, a recent disc herniation where it's compressing a nerve, there's lots of inflammation. And by giving a shot of anti-inflammatory steroid, you can really bring down a lot of the inflammation. And then you get some time for your body to actually heal the disc. And if you look at these discs, they do have an ability to heal themselves, especially ones that are brand new. And so if you give them, you mitigate some of the muscular symptoms, you eliminate some of the inflammatory symptoms and compression from those herniations, you can actually get a good amount of relief from some of these non-surgical treatments.
And we should say you're going to be hosting a panel discussion. It's actually here at WJCT Studios, and it's free. It's tomorrow from 5:30 to 8. And people are welcome to bring questions to that event. And so I'm sure you'll be fielding a lot of them. But one I alluded to in the introduction, which is women seem to suffer lower back pain more than men. Do you know why that is?
Well, there's structural differences between a male's skeleton. And so if you think about the vertebral bodies, they're smaller. As women age, the estrogen support disappears. And so there's a more rapid breakdown of bone. And so you have risks for things like osteoporosis and fractures. And I think, living life with a busy mom, you're busy. You have things to do, whether you have kids and you have a job and all these other responsibilities. It ends up being that a lot of it is self-care is neglected. And
I feel like pregnancy plays a role too for a lot of women, that they develop some back pain during a pregnancy or the period after.
Yeah. So for sure, when you're in preparation for having baby, your ligaments are supposed to relax and be prepared to stretch. And so if you imagine those ligaments, they get stretched and relaxed. If you think about your abdominal muscles, they actually separate. And so a lot of the supporting structure is changed for the spine in that, especially in those periods of time.
And so what do you anticipate leading with at your panel discussion tomorrow?
Well, it's great. We're having each one of the surgeons that are represented on the panel will have a patient story. So essentially, we're going to be telling the back pain story through the generations via patient stories. And so we'll be able to hit a lot of the topics that are both surgical, non-surgical, over the course of several different people's lives with examples. And them and their families will be there representing their story.
Well, if you're interested in getting a ticket to the free event, you can go to womensspinehealth.eventbrite.com. Dr. Andrew Shaw, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Up next, a new law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. One texter call can wreck it all. Learn more through distracted driving presentations for teens and the workforce. Arrive alive. Let's end distracted driving.
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com.
The Jacksonville Music Experience presents Psych Soul Band Ghost Funk Orchestra performing live on the WJCT soundstage on Friday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. Tickets and more information at jacksmusic.org/JME events.
America's boys are falling behind in school. We're launching a special series to find out why. Episode 1, How Do Boys Learn?
He told the teacher, this is boring. And he said he wanted to go home.
He calls it 6 cruel hours of our lives, an acronym for school.
Don't miss the start of Falling Behind, the miseducation of America's boys. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, actor Richard Kind. You've seen him on countless TV shows and films in his 40-year career. Only Murders in the Building, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Spin City, Mad About You, A Serious Man, and as Bing Bong in Inside Out, just to name a few. He's now the announcer and sidekick on Everybody's Live with John Mulaney. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
The Trump administration pulled $400 million in federal funding from Columbia University last month. Now it's targeting other universities, including the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard. Why is Trump going after universities, and what does this mean for the future of U.S. higher education? That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, a new crop of First Coast celebrities is queuing up for their dancing debut in just a little less than 2 weeks, actually. Here to tell us about the 11th annual River City Dancing with the Stars fundraiser is TJ Ward. He is a featured dancer and executive director of Project Opioid at the Jacksonville Chamber. Good morning, TJ.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, you're not a dancer by trade.
Not at all.
How were you approached for this, and how did you decide that you wanted to do it?
So I received an email from the staff over at JCC, the Jacksonville Children's Chorus, and the email said there's an opportunity for you to become a celebrity dancer to help raise funds for the Children's Chorus. I went and met with them. They shared the mission of the organization, and it was something that I took to right away. And so that's kind of how I got involved with this fundraiser, this event.
So it's one thing to support the mission and something else entirely to say, well, I'm going to go ahead and hop on stage and dance in front of an audience of strangers when I've never danced before. So what actually got that light to go green for you?
So for me, it's and the Children's Chorus does some amazing things. They have opportunities to really perform with their touring choirs all over the world, honestly, and lots of unique opportunities to do some things that, most kids would never get to do. But for me, it was the kids that they're helping that normally wouldn't have access to the fine arts, to this type of choral education, to performance opportunities. And so that's what tugged at my heartstrings, and that's what really got me involved and caused me to take this leap into the dance world.
And so the chorus was founded in 1995, but their own record keeping shows that about 44% of the people who are the children who participate receive some sort of aid to help pay for this programming. And so I guess, that's the genesis behind this. I think it's been going now for 11 years, this annual event. But what did you need to bring to it in terms of physical ability and, I don't know, I guess adaptability to pick up a new craft?
Yeah, so it's something that was completely foreign to me. I grew up playing sports. I didn't do anything in the dance realm. So you would think that some of that would translate pretty easily, but there was a learning curve for sure. So you talk about it adapting to, different types of movements, and my instructor, because they'll pair you with a professional dancer as your instructor, is very patient with me. And it took a while to catch on, but then it's kind of like anything else. Muscle memory takes over. And once you memorize the routine, you can start, fine tuning it and working on some of the specific details related to it. And that's kind of where we're at now leading up to the event.
And so this is a competitive event. There are judges that constitute half the vote. There are donations from individuals that I think a dollar counts as a vote. And so that all adds up to see who is the winner. But you really have a knockout performance. I don't think has ever been done in the history of this Dancing with the Stars locally.
To my knowledge, this routine hasn't been done. It's the finale to Dirty Dancing. It's a little bit different, but all of the main parts are included, including the iconic lift there at the end. So we're going to pull that off on April 26th at the event, and hopefully it'll be a crowd pleaser.
It definitely is going to be a crowd pleaser. That is an incredibly popular song and dance, I think, for a lot of people, an iconic film. And so what made you choose that?
I'm a competitor, a competitive person, and I figured if I could do something challenging like that and pull it off, maybe that would give me an advantage. In addition to the fundraising, obviously, first and foremost, this event exists to help raise funds for the chorus, but I also want to win. So I figured if I could pull that off, maybe I'd have a good chance.
And you have been doing some social media to promote both your participation, the fundraising component, but you also have put up some snippets of you guys in rehearsals.
Yes.
So if people are interested in seeing some of that and kind of checking out your moves and the dance routine, where can they find that?
So on Instagram, I'm TJ Ward FL, as in Florida. Facebook, TJ Ward, and then on LinkedIn, I'm on there as well, TJ Ward FL.
We will link to that with our story on our website so people can check it out. So this is, as we said, it's a little over a week. It's the 26th on Saturday, and it's at UNF's Lazara Performance Hall. Are you getting some nerves? I mean, how are you feeling now that we're really getting close?
It's crunch time. So I'm not nervous yet. And I imagine the day of, there will be a little bit of nerves. We did a dress rehearsal, so that was helpful in front of our fellow competitors. We all performed our dances a couple weeks back. And that was a little nerve-wracking, but I think, the more time we're able to put in, the more comfortable we get with the actual dance performance. I think it'll translate, on the night of. So looking forward to it. I'm more excited than anything else. And really, yes, I want to perform the dance, but I'm also really excited to see how much money we can raise for JCC.
Yeah. Well, we wish you the best of luck, TJ Ward. There are tickets and information you can get at jackschildrenschorus.org. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. And the actual website for the event is rivercitydwts.com.
Excellent.
And all the information is available there.
All right.
Thank you.
TJ, thanks for being here today.
Yep.
And thank you for listening. That's our show. If you have questions or comments, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything today, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can find our entire arc.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Florida State University license plates support scholarships for students at FSU, a preeminent institution that enriches and contributes to the state and nation. Gifts for first-time buyers can be found online at fsu.edu/mytag.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com.